Shalom, shalom. My name is Barney de Klerk, and this video is about the gospel portion of Parashat Mishpatim. I'm not sitting in my study as usual because it's hot and humid, and we've got a thunderstorm brewing, which will hopefully bring some relief later tonight. But I decided to sit on the veranda on our agterstoep at home to make this video. The gospel portion is from Matthew 17, verse 22 to 27, just short 5 verses, but meaningful. It is the second prediction of Yeshua predicting his own death and resurrection here in Matthew 17, and it follows after his first prediction of his own death and resurrection in Matthew 16, just a chapter earlier, verse 21 to 28. To understand what we're reading, I'll just reflect on Matthew 16, 21 to 28. We read how Simon Peter, or Kepha, took Yeshua aside and rebuked him for talking about going to Jerusalem to be sacrificed, to be killed on Passover and raised again on the third day. And Yeshua then told Kepha, Simon Peter, not to contemplate the things of men, but the things of Adonai. And Yeshua explained that following after him requires us to die to ourselves and to take up our crosses, and in that way we will follow him. He promised that whoever loses his life for Yeshua's sake will find life. For the Son of Man is about to come into the glory of his Father. And I need to explain this title, Son of Man. That's looking at Yeshua from a heavenly perspective. You look down on earth, you say, there's the Son of Man, who is part God, part man. Son of Man, if you look from heaven. But for us here on earth, when we look at him, we see him as the Son of God. So, Son of God is his earthly title, Son of Man is his heavenly title. He promised that whoever loses his life for Yeshua's sake will find life. For the Son of Man is about to come into the glory of his Father, and after that he will repay everyone. It means that he will be the righteous judge and measure out rewards and punishment to everybody according to their deeds. Not faith, we're saved by faith, but we are rewarded and punished by our deeds. Yeshua's second announcement in this week's gospel portion, then from Matthew 17, verse 22 to 27, whilst they were still safely in the Galilee, started with the same statement. The Son of Man is about to be delivered over into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised. This time the penny dropped for the disciples, and they were greatly distressed. And then, because it was Tu B'Shavat, Tu B'Shavat is the new year of trees, and it's the annual day on which the half shekel of temple tax required of every adult man in Israel became due as well. And the Levites, who were tasked to collect from everyone their dues, came to Kepha, Simon Peter, and their demand came in the form of a question. They said, your Rabbi pays temple tax, doesn't he? And Kepha, Simon Peter answered in the affirmative, because he would have witnessed that Yeshua paid temple tax before, in the previous year. I spoke a little bit about the New Year for trees in last week's I can't remember now, maybe Torah portion, maybe Gospel or Prophet portion. The New Year of Trees is just a counter. The Torah says that for the first 3 years after you planted a new tree, you cannot touch the fruit. In the 4th year, the fruit belongs to Adonai as first fruits. And in the 5th year, you can commercially exploit the fruit for yourself and for your own benefit. This is the Torah for trees, and the second day of the 11th month. The 11th month in Hebrew is also known as Shavat. So Tu B'Shavat is the New Year of Trees. That's the counter when it ticks over. But it also was the counter that ticks over the new temple tax season. A half shekel of silver temple tax was introduced first by Moses in Exodus 30, verse 11 to 16, if you want to read it, where Adonai commanded him, Moses, to collect a half shekel of silver from every Israelite male during a census. This was a ransom for the life of that man for being counted. And this tax served as a form of atonement, and it was then later on redirected for the upkeep of the tabernacle and even later for the upkeep of the temple in Jerusalem. In fact, in Exodus and in the book of Numbers, the Hebrew text avoid using the word saphira, which means counting of Israelite men. But instead it uses the word golgolet in an expression that means, instead of counting, it means lifting up the skull of every man. The half shekel therefore redeems the skull of every man. Hence it was a ransom for his life. In this regard, I'm fairly sure that the Golgotha under the floor of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem was never the place of Yeshua's crucifixion, and that the story of Adam's skull that was buried there is mere fiction, in my opinion. The hill above the garden tomb, I think, have far more promise to be Golgotha, as the garden tomb seems a far more likely place for Yeshua's burial site. And of course, the cliff on the above the garden tomb looks like a skull as well. So I think that's far more likely than the Holy Sepulchre. However, on the crossroads, just northeast of Jerusalem, on the road to Jericho, where all the pilgrims from the north, from the Galilee, would have entered Jerusalem as well, on crossroads where one side comes from the north, other side from Jericho, all the roads goes into Jerusalem. On that side, the Romans erected an influx control station where people who were making aliyah for Adonai's Moedim were counted and controlled. And estimates say that for Pesach, for the Passover, as many as 1 million pilgrims may have arrived. So the Romans wanted to do crowd control. And in biblical terms, because Jews were not counted, their skulls were lifted, they were subject to golgolet rather than saphira. The place where the Romans were doing their influx control were known as Golgotha. That's where they counted or lifted the skulls of every pilgrim. And I think that is the real Golgotha. It's a place, if the cross were erected there as well, because it's on the crossroads, every pilgrim who came to Jerusalem would have seen it. Every pilgrim who left Jerusalem would have seen it as well. And that is the place where Yeshua paid a half shekel of silver's value in blood for each person who follows him. He paid for the Golgoleth, the skull of every believer for all time. The reason why this specific gospel portion is prescribed for this week is because it leads up to the 12th new moon of the Hebrew calendar. And because we have recently commemorated the minor feast of Tu B'Shavat, the New Year of Trees. The New Year of Trees being the trigger for the new temple tax season to start, and the temple tax season closed by the new moon of the 12th month. 12th month is also called Adar, after the Babylonian exile. So this is because trees in the Bible are a metaphor for people in several biblical texts. I'm going to mention only two, but there are several. In Psalm 1 verse 3, we read that a righteous person is described as a tree planted by streams of water, a tree planted by streams of water. And in Mark 8 verse 24, a formerly blind man whose spirit eyes were opened before his physical eyes saw people walking around like trees. Have you ever wondered why that blind man said they walk around like trees? That was his spirit eyes functioning, and this is the biblical association or metaphor of trees and people. Tu B'Shavat, therefore, is also not only the new year for trees, but also the new year for people. And the new man person has to be redeemed through the temple tax. The analogy is to be born again as a new man in Yeshua, as a new tree, so to speak, which is rooted in Tu B'Shavat. This may be the reason why the biblical texts flow from Yeshua's death and resurrection to temple tax, just over the verse change between Matthew 17:23 and verse 24. These matters are related and they are interconnected, but you have to scratch the surface in order to find that. So why did the Levites ask their temple tax related question regarding Yeshua? The Bible commentators disappoints me often, and in this case they speculate that the Levites approached Kepha, Simon Peter instead of Yeshua because their house belonged to Kepha or Simon Peter. Or alternatively, and I think this holds more water, the Levites asked Simon Peter, Kepha, regarding Yeshua as a respect for Yeshua's authority. Maybe they were placing him on a pedestal like the priest, because the priest in the corrupted house of Annas felt themselves to be above Torah law. They did not pay the temple tax themselves. They saw that they were above that. And remember, Annas is the one who corrupted the priesthood. He was appointed high priest by the Romans in the year 6 AD. And after him, his sons, and eventually his son-in-law and then his grandchildren became high priest until the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. His son-in-law is somebody you have heard about. His name is Joseph Caiaphas. Okay, so the Levites thought that maybe Yeshua counts himself to be above the law as the house of Annas priest did. And I think that this may likely be the true reason why they asked Peter and not Yeshua. And it is spiritually significant, I think. I think they also may have asked the question to Simon Peter Kepha and not Yeshua because in the back of their minds they assumed that Yeshua really was the Son of God. It's something they knew subconsciously. And Son of God, remember, that's the title. From the earthly perspective, the Levites were talking from the earthly perspective. So this places Yeshua far above the priest. And then, only then, if you take this assumption, the talk that Yeshua had with Simon Peter or Kepha, as soon as he returns home, then it has relevance. A strange thing happened. As Kepha, Simon Peter returned to the house where they resided at the time, Yeshua asked him about taxes, even before he could raise the question. Yeshua could discern the time for tax submissions because he was immersed and subscribed to Jewish culture. The temple tax was a Torah requirement, and Yeshua upheld the Torah. He approved. And then yet another strange thing happened thereafter. Yeshua meddled with the nature of fishing and fish again. In previous fish-related miracles, he caused a catch of 157 large fish after a fruitless night's labor when he called his disciples. And on 2 other occasions, he multiplied fish as part of a miraculous meal to provide for his followers. On this occasion, Yeshua, who called Kepha, Simon Peter, away from commercial fishing enterprises to become a fisher of men, he was sent back to his former profession to catch a fish, and not just any fish. Yeshua specified the first fish that comes up, that one, the fish with the silver shekel in his mouth, catch him. I wonder what Simon Peter Kepha thought at that instruction. So you can ask, how is this related to Kepha Simon Peter's former reaction? Remember that when Yeshua first spoke of his coming death, Kepha Simon Peter rebuked him. In this passage, mere days later, Yeshua raised the temple tax issue before Simon Peter Kepha could open his mouth, and he sent him off fishing. And the fish he was after is probably the so-called St. Peter's fish, which is a delicious fish but bony to eat if you eat in a restaurant in Israel. It occurs in the Galilee, and it's got a tendency to swallow shiny objects, and that makes it susceptible to spooning. But it also makes it susceptible to swallow any shining thing like a coin or even bottle caps or soda pop rings in modern times. However, to find this a silver shekel and not something else in the very first fish testifies to Adonai's provision. And to bring this provision, Simon Peter Kepha needed a single hook and not a net. That's why Yeshua told him, go cast a hook, not cast a net. Cast a hook and take the first fish. So what does that imply for us as believers? Fish is called dag in Hebrew, and it is represented also by the Hebrew letter nun, not for fish so much, but for multiplication. And therefore fish is a symbol of fertility, of prosperity, of abundance, equal to my cup runneth over, if you talk King David's language of Psalm 23. It talks about blessing, abundant blessing in the physical and in the spiritual dimension. The scales and fins of kosher fish represents integrity and ambition, and all these aspects together should describe the character of the person who subscribes and follows the symbol of the fish in our time. The idea that a person can be bought and sold, and his soul redeemed by a piece of silver, or by 30 pieces of silver for that matter, is not so strange as it may seem at first glance. The Torah states that every firstborn person and or animal belongs to Adonai and must be either redeemed for silver or sacrificed. And that's from the book of Numbers, chapter 3, 46 to 51. In Hebrew, the word for silver is kesef, and kesef denotes money, or regardless of what sum of money it is. However, silver is symbolic of the humanness of us in the refiner's fire of Malachi 2, and in Isaiah 122 and 125. The silver shekel from the fish's mouth was to serve as temple tax for Yeshua and for Kepha Simon Peter. So silver, after all, then buys for our redemption of our skulls and our souls. I pray that Adonai Eloheinu will bless you and keep you as you read these passages for yourself. I pray that He will lift His countenance, His provision upon you, and that He will give you shalom. Shalom, shalom.